Show on Fridays. I'm Al McCauley, and if you're old enough to remember, there was a TV show that ran from 1967 to 70 for 3 years called The Flying Nun, and it starred a relatively unknown actress at that time, Sally Field, who has gone on to win, I believe, 2 Oscars, so she's really well known now, but at the time, it was called The Flying Nun, and she played a young, optimistic, waif-like little nun named Sister Bertrille. And she was part of a community of nuns that lived in Puerto Rico. And the show kind of centered around her and the work that they would do in the community. And because she was so thin and petite, and she had the wimple, that particular head piece that they would wear, when a strong wind would come by, it would pick her up and she could fly. And so that's why it was called The Flying Nun, because she could fly. And it's pretty, you look back now and you wonder who watched that, but it was interesting. You know, her order would teach in the show, her order would teach to the underprivileged and the orphan people in the Hispanic community. So a little bit ahead of its time, actually, that TV show in terms of outreach and whatever. But why am I starting an episode talking about a sitcom from the late 60s? It's because we had a TV show called The Flying Nun, and I want to talk to you today about a saint who could fly. Patron saint of aviators. He could levitate and fly, and I'm talking about Joseph of Cupertino. Joseph of Cupertino. Wanted to make sure I got that right. He was known as a reluctant saint, but he could fly. It's not that he wanted to do this, but grace, the grace of God, gave him this particular ecstasy event and made him to be able to levitate for long periods of time, in fact, so that people would be aware of the greatness of God. In fact, before you turn this off and think I'm off my nut because I'm talking about a guy who could fly, there are over 70 documented cases of him levitating and flying around a room. Even one by the Pope, which I'll get to in a minute. But let's back up and look at this guy. Joseph was born, like Jesus, in a stable. He was born to a dad who was a poor carpenter, and he was raised Catholic, and he had these ecstasies at a very young age. And by ecstasies, I mean these mystical experiences. And it would make him, like, he would see things, and it would make him stop and stare and wonder at what he was seeing. And so his mouth would just drop open. He was open, gaped. And so he was ridiculed quite a bit by his classmates. In fact, they jokingly called him open mouth because that's how he seemed to appear when these ecstasies would happen. And he seemed aloof, like he wasn't really into what was going on around him because of these ecstasies. And because of these things, he couldn't focus. He couldn't focus at school. He really couldn't focus well. And it led him to be an angry young man. Often had fits of outrage and outbursts of anger. And it wasn't until he was a bit older and he became a bit more mature that he could handle that. But this really stifled his education. And what he wanted to do as he grew older is he wanted to enter the religious life. But the lack of education, because of these events that made him not succeed in school, it was very difficult for him to enter. In fact, no religious order would welcome him. What he did do, though, is he was able to secure a job cleaning the stables at a local Franciscan monastery. And he did this for a long time. And the brothers that lived there got to know him, and they recognized him, that he had a particular holiness about him and a particular humility, and he was obedient about cleaning and doing whatever they asked of him to do, to the point where they said, you know what? After several years of this service and this humility and this obedience, they welcomed him. They accepted him as one of those, and he was their own, and he was ordained. And that's when these ecstasies really began in earnest. Once he was a Franciscan friar, he started to levitate. And again, we have documented cases of this by people. He levitated at Mass regularly. It seems that any time there was something spiritual going on or something of heightened importance in his religious life, it was like a magnet from heaven that would raise him off the ground, physically raise him off the ground. In fact, some people in his order became skeptical, and he was banned by his order to even attend Mass in public for a while. Or he'd have to move to different friaries because they didn't want it to create such a public scene, if you will. It is said that one Christmas Eve Mass, in fact, he levitated for 15 minutes. One of his fellow priests was skeptical and was jealous of him because he was clearly becoming the center of attention for a lot of people. And so he kind of ratted him out to the Inquisition. And the Inquisition met with him. And during their trial, he actually levitated. And so kind of, I suppose, out of awe and maybe out of a little fear, they let him go. They said, we're not going to hold you in trial anymore. So he was able to go back to being a priest. One of the most remarkable events of his life was when he was asked to accompany the Father General of his order to go have an audience with the Pope. And they met with Pope Urban VIII. And when he was so enamored or taken by this spiritually that he got to meet the Pope, that he started to levitate in the Pope's presence. And he flew around. And the Pope said to the Father General, if I outlive him and he becomes a saint, I will be willing to testify at his canonization to make sure that people know that this is real, that this actually happened, and I witnessed it with my own 2 eyes. It's even said that some levitations could last up to 6 or even 7 hours. Now, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine seeing it. I can't imagine it happening to me. But Joseph of Cupertino was a remarkable man. And, in John's gospel, Jesus says that his followers will do things that he did, but even more than that, more remarkable, because he'll be with the Father. So we really shouldn't be surprised that saints do things like this, that saints are given this gift. It's not like he did it himself. He didn't just fly when he wanted to fly. This was an all gift from God as a way to help draw other people to God. But I think about this, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11, verses 28 to 30, Jesus says that very, very famous thing, come to me if you are weary, come to me those of you who are labored, and I will make your burden light. He says to imitate me because I am humble and meek of heart. And I think Joseph of Cupertino took himself lightly. He didn't take himself too seriously. And I think sometimes we all do. And maybe this is one of the lessons. If you're watching this and you're thinking, come on, guy's not going to float. He's not going to fly. I don't believe this. At least think about it this way. What lesson can you take from this man, from this saint? I would say maybe there are times when we take ourselves too seriously. We're often weighed down by burdens that we put on ourselves. We compare ourselves to others. We work hard because we want things as opposed to maybe relationships and ultimately the relationship with God. And so maybe we need to be more humble and take ourselves not so seriously, but a little bit lighter. We might not fly like him, like Joseph of Cupertino, but we might find our souls levitating a bit. And I think that maybe that's the whole point. So anyway, that's Joseph of Cupertino. If you feel like sharing this content with someone, that would be great. We'd appreciate that. We'd love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Facebook. But either way, thanks for tuning in, and we hope you will continue to do that every Friday for more Fish on Fridays. Until next time, please be good to each other, and God bless.